You're listening to a CNA podcast.
My answer is very simple. If they complain, if you want your tariff rate to be zero, then you build your product right here in America, because there is no tariff if you build your plant, your product in America.
U.S. President Donald Trump speaking after he unveiled duties on more than 180 countries and territories. His so-called reciprocal tariffs aimed at allies and adversaries alike. I'm Arnold Gay.
And I'm Elizabeth Neo. This is a special episode of the CNA Correspondent podcast. Arnold and I are actually playing the role of correspondent today as we dig into the slew of numbers unleashed by the Trump administration.
This is one of the most important days, in my opinion, in American history. It's our declaration of economic independence. For years, hardworking American citizens were forced to sit on the sidelines as other nations got rich and powerful, much of it at our expense. But now it's our turn to prosper.
Okay, so Arnold, Trump tariffs for dummies. How is it going to work?
Okay, so Mr. Trump spoke in the White House Rose Garden. In the crowd, administration officials, along with rank-and-file steel workers and auto workers. He held up a big poster listing terrorist nations charged the United States, and then the reciprocal duty Mr. Trump will be charging. So for China, for example, the president says they charge 67% on American imports. The reciprocal tariff will be 34%. But then you add on 20% existing tariffs imposed since Mr. Trump came back to power, it adds up to 54%. For the EU, the White House says they charge 39%, so the reciprocal tariff is 20%. Basically, it's always half. The tariffs are imposed in stages, so 10% starting on April 5th and then the rest starting April 9th.
Yeah, so that 10% being the universal baseline tariffs on all imports. Some U.S. trading partners, they're just facing that alone, and they include the UK, Australia, and Singapore. But others are taking hard hits. And Arnold, as you pointed out, China is looking at 34% reciprocal tariffs. Then we've got Japan looking at 24%, India 26%, Indonesia 32%, Thailand 36%, Vietnam 46%, and Cambodia 49%. And Donald Trump has still called them a discounted reciprocal tariff, and this higher rate is being placed on countries that the administration thinks hasn't been playing fair instead of that 10% universal.
So what we have to understand is that these reciprocal tariffs will sometimes go on top of other tariffs, like with China. In other cases, if there's a tariff in place that's higher for certain products, like some metals, that tariff will apply. Another case in point, China's EVs already have a 100% tariff.
That is a lot. And that is not all for China. Its e-commerce market, touted as the largest in the world, is another target. The administration offered more details on the de minimis changes. Earlier, it signed an order to end the de minimis tariff exemptions, and we now hear that this will take effect on the 2nd of May. Now, the de minimis exemption allows packages worth as much as $800 from China and Hong Kong to enter the U.S. duty-free. And so this means that there is more pain coming for discount marketplaces like Temu and Shein.
There's more. Millions of more packages for U.S. Customs and Border Protection staff to sort through. So what President Trump really seems to be signaling is that this is the end of globalization as we know it, the end of international trade.
Chronic trade deficits are no longer merely an economic problem. They're a national emergency that threatens our security and our very way of life.
So, Liz, what does it all mean? Now, we've seen markets here in Asia fall on the news, though not as much for stocks in Singapore, with investors perhaps thinking the city-state got off easier, perhaps? U.S. futures are crumbling, adding to the losses Wall Street has taken in the week since President Trump showed he meant business on tariffs.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a bloodbath. In fact, Matt Maley from Militayback told me that the country's specific reciprocal tariffs won't do much to erase uncertainty from the markets, and it could also spell trouble for the upcoming earnings season.
It actually, if anything, made things more uncertain because people are saying, okay, now it seems like the administration is really going out, with the worst case scenario right now, and they'll be able to back off. But since it's the worst case scenario and not anything easier, which I think a lot of people were hoping for, it means that where are they going to meet in the middle? The middle isn't quite as good as people had thought before. So this is something that's going to create more confusion, and especially when we're moving into earnings season in the U.S. in just over a week, it just does not bode well for the kind of thing that will give people confidence to step back into this market. It's not just investors; it's business executives who don't know how much should they spend, how much should they pull back, how much should they cut back, etc.
In fact, a sign of how unnerved investors are, they're fleeing to safe haven gold, which earlier hit a new high of more than $3,160 an ounce. And analysts say that the reciprocal tariff action is much more serious than expected. Now, here is Edward Eldon. He is a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations.
It's really a declaration of economic war on the whole world. And I don't think any of us expected anything quite that dramatic. We're looking at something fundamentally different. Donald Trump trying to remake the American economy as a protected economy rather than an open economy. That is a radical, radical transformation that I don't think his supporters really get yet, but they will figure it out.
So even longtime allies like Japan are not spared. The Japanese Prime Minister said earlier this week he wanted to negotiate in an effort to head off those tariffs, but Donald Trump is hitting the country with a 24% levy anyway. Japan's Trade Minister Yoji Muto said that Japan is leaving all options open to respond to the tariffs. Here's Mr. Trump again.
94% of the cars in Japan are made in Japan. Toyota sells 1 million foreign-made automobiles into the United States, and General Motors sells almost none. Ford sells very little. None of our companies are allowed to go into other countries. And I say that friend and foe, and in many cases, the friend is worse than the foe in terms of trade.
Now, given the size of Japan's auto industry, with 59,000 smaller firms supporting 8 major car makers, our senior correspondent in Tokyo, Michio Ishida, says that is bad news for Japan.
According to Japan's finance ministry, Japan's auto and auto-related exports to the United States total over 8.3 trillion yen in 2024, which is about 56 billion US dollars. And all of that makes up about 40% of Japan's exports to the United States.
So you would think that countries with existing free trade agreements will be spared, right? Not true at all. Singapore, Australia, and South Korea all hit by levies ranging from 10% to 25%. Well, South Korea's acting president, Han Duck-soo, Thursday ordered emergency support measures for industries and businesses that will be impacted by President Trump's sweeping tariffs. Canberra called the 10% tariff on Australian exports totally unwarranted, but said it would not be retaliating.
The administration's tariffs have no basis in logic, and they go against the basis of our two nations partnership. This is not the act of a friend. Today's decision will add to uncertainty in the global economy, and it will push up costs for American households. It is the American people who will pay the biggest price for these unjustified tariffs. This is why our government will not be seeking to impose reciprocal tariffs. We will not join a race to the bottom that leads to higher prices and slower growth.
Yeah, Arnold, and we're also hearing from China, which said it firmly opposes those sweeping new U.S. tariffs and vowed countermeasures to safeguard its own rights and interests. And I'm also looking at a post from Casey Barnett, the head of the American Chamber of Commerce in Cambodia, who issues a stark warning. He says that the reciprocal tariffs on Cambodia, that is 49%, if not aggressively addressed within the next couple of weeks, will destroy the Cambodian economy and create a deep economic recession. We're looking at a loss of several 100,000 jobs in a country with a population of only 17 million. And he also flags the possibility of social instability and rapid capital outflow.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about a pain for other countries. Where and what does the U.S. stand to gain? Well, White House trade advisor Peter Navarro estimated the U.S. would raise about $600 billion to $700 billion a year from tariffs. We have some estimates here from Exige on the revenue from the new U.S. tariffs.
Yeah, so $149 billion coming from China, $63 billion coming from Vietnam.
Taiwan, $37 billion, and Japan, $36 billion.
But people are skeptical. Economists expect the Trump administration's tariff policy would generate a much lower amount of revenue than Mr. Navarro claims. Some project the total revenue could even be less than half.
The reality is that this story isn't complete. Trump has not been deterred by drops on Wall Street, falling consumer sentiment, or recession fears. But Frank Levin, former Undersecretary for International Trade at the U.S. Department of Commerce, says rising discontent among Americans will.
I think if this goes more than 30 days, we're going to see an impact in the unemployment numbers. And then you have broad discontent in the United States. Meaning if it's a little bit of pain, a little bit of dislocation for a few weeks, that might be acceptable. But if it goes on for more than a few weeks and the unemployment numbers start trickling up, I think President Trump will pay a price for this politically.
The tariff plan is complex, and there's still so much we don't know. Like questions like how flexible President Trump will be, or if he really means make your goods in America or else. We also don't know how countries will react and how the global supply chain will be impacted.
Yeah, and today and in the coming days, we will be hearing from businesses that are going to be navigating this new normal. Here is Vince Tercy of Craft Brewery Dissolver in the state of North Carolina.
Nothing is safe from these tariffs. The policy essentially is a total loss for small businesses. It's based on the idea that we can just start manufacturing everything here overnight, and that's not how a free trade market existed in the first place.
So there's a window between now and Saturday, April 5th, for countries to negotiate before the baseline 10% tariff kicks in, and then another 4 days or so before full tariffs take effect on the 9th of April. Will countries be combative like China, or will they take their cues from the Australian Prime Minister, who's protested strongly but has chosen not to retaliate?
Yeah, one thing's for sure, what they decide will potentially impact jobs, inflation, and of course, the global economy. All right, that's it for this special episode of the CNA Correspondent podcast.
A reminder, you can catch reports from all our correspondents on CNA's YouTube channel and CNA.Asia. And please note, the TV episodes of CNA Correspondent air every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. The team behind this week's edition is Sai Ye Win, Clara Ong, Crispina Robert, Craig Dale, Tiffany Ang. I'm Arnold Gay with Elizabeth Neo. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Until next time.